All right, good afternoon. My name is Emily Kohler-Sala. I'm partner and co-founder here at Daily Vest. We are top of the funnel growth experts that help B2B healthcare and higher education organizations grow thoughtful human-to-human digital outreach programs. To date, we are helping over 60 partners across industries. Now let's make today more about you than Daily Vest. We'll be discussing tangible takeaways that will help you grow your graduate programs and specialized master's programs. A couple of quick housekeeping items. All participants are in listen-only mode. Please submit questions you have through the chat. We will try to reserve time to answer these at the end. Joining me today are two of our partners who will share their perspectives on how they use lead generation to help reach the outreach and prospective lead goals for their organizations. I'll hand it over to them to give brief introductions.
Thanks, Emily. I'll go first. I'm Kelly Jones. I am the head of strategic partnerships for Compass Health Center, which is a intensive behavioral health program here in Illinois, and then also headed towards Maryland, Virginia, and DC this year. Lots of opportunities for growth. I've worked in higher education at the University of Chicago, in development and fundraising, and I also ran schools for about 15 years, mostly secondary schools, and have consulted for a number of higher ed institutions on marketing strategy and business goals. So very nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Joe Miller. I'm the Director of Sales and Marketing with Mutara. Mutara is a SaaS company that focuses on growing enrollment for higher ed institutions by increasing high quality engagement with students during the application and enrollment processes. And our intent is to grow enrollment for all different populations, but we really focus on specialized populations of students, including graduate students, international students, non-degree seeking transfer, dual enrollment, the list goes on. So that's really where our bread and butter is. Prior to joining Mutara, I was the Director of University Marketing Communications and the Director of Enrollment Systems and Operations at North Park University in Chicago. And I oversaw all activities related to university marketing, enrollment marketing, and then management of our CRM as well.
Great. Thank you both for being here. So we've got a lot to cover, so we're going to dive right in. We find it helpful to reference this graphic, which is not ours. Kudos to HubSpot for developing it, which shows the path from stranger to promoter. Lead generation at its core is about reaching out to the right person with the right message at the right time. As professionals, we can control two of these variables. First, we can determine who we think are the perfect candidates. Second, we can control the message we send out to these prospective students. Last but not least is timing. The ugly truth is that we have very little control over the timing of when a potential student is ready to take the next step in applying and enrolling. While it's frustrating not to control all variables in our process, it's also a reality. The way we combat not having this control over timing is to meaningfully present in front of your prospective students. We could go months and even years messaging a prospective student who pays no attention to our notes. It happens. Then one day, 18 months down the road, your prospect feels stagnant in their job and is looking to take the next step in their career and is looking for a program just like yours to help. While it might look like lucky timing, lead gen enthusiasts know it took 20 months of execution and planning to generate that application. In order to do that, there are a variety of channels that you can use as part of your candidate prospecting efforts, some of which are listed here. However, what we really want to talk about is how often it takes from a touchpoint perspective to get this prospective candidate to speak to you. Imagine how many times this prospective candidate needs to see your name, message, and story to move through these different stages. Too many people don't appreciate the time that it takes to achieve these steps. That's why these stats are so staggering. I'd like to pause here and get Kelly and Joe's reaction to these statistics, and given their work in higher education, have you found this to be true?
Oh, absolutely. I think, I mean, if you look at the work in university, you're pulled in so many different directions. It's really not just whether you have a ton of resources or you have very, few, and you have more of a guerrilla tactic in reaching out to people. I think we all give up too easy, not because it's our intent, but because there's just so many different bright and shiny objects or ways that we could try to reach out to the new person that we forget about engagement and deepening relationships, and that it takes that many times for someone to recognize us. before they actually are willing to speak with us. It takes it's like you're building trust almost without even having a phone call at sometimes. And yeah, I definitely think that that's true. I gave up a lot in my early years.
I would agree. From the perspective of North Park, I think giving up might not necessarily be the language that I would use, because oftentimes our recruiters would end up spending time with those students who have moved down funnel. So we just kind of forget about the top of the funnel, right? So you might be working with those students at the beginning of an admission cycle, and then all of a sudden it's just like, well, I have my candidate pool, I'm working on that particular group. So one of the things that we would do in this instance is we would create a lot of automated emails that looked and feel very personal at the top of the funnel. So that was one way that we were kind of combating this particular issue.
Thank you. Now let's get into how to really use these different steps to fill at the top of your funnel. So we always start by identifying that the end goal should be of our outreach and then work backward to get there. So this will be different for every university and every campaign. But while the goals might change, the process is relatively the same. In our work with higher education partners, we typically start by understanding the enrollment goals and organization's mission, so we can work backward and determine our targets for the number of conversations and the number of applications. Joe, I'm going to stop here and ask you, how did your team go about setting goals for enrollment during your time at North Park?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the places that we started in particular was getting to a point within our CRM where we had live funnel reports where we could kind of rely on those. And we got to the point where we were able to kind of look at even kind of week-to-week progress, day-to-day progress with those. In particular, with our graduate populations, it was challenging because the priority was always undergraduate. So we finally got to a point where we were able to provide these. It was about 3 years into our CRM implementation. We were able to provide these reports to our graduate teams, and it really allowed us to kind of peel back some of the layers as far as building out where we might be lagging in the funnel. And we really noticed that lead generation was, or the very top of the funnel, we had a lot of stale, stagnant leads in there, which kind of pushed us in a direction to kind of evaluate, all right, where can we generate new leads in a way that these folks are engaged. So we had done a lot of list purchasing over the years, but that ultimately pushed us in the direction of working with Daily Best and finding somebody who's going to engage with the client or engage with the leads and give us more warm leads, I would say. So, but yeah, having those reports within the CRM was kind of like our starting point to really kind of evaluate building out what those goals would be. The other thing that I would say is one thing that we would do, particularly with our communications, we would look at things from month to month to see if at any point during the admission cycle, if we were lagging. So we were able to kind of tweak how heavy we had to put our foot on the gas in certain instances, or in other instances where we had to kind of reduce communications. And we were always really working hand in hand with our recruiters so that we could balance between the type of automated marketing Comflow messages and the messages that recruiters were sending out, because we obviously didn't want to send something out from Joe Miller, the recruiter, and then also have an automated message coming from Joe Miller as well. So we had to find a balance between that. And that just came from having accurate reporting at the start.
You bring up a great point, and it actually leads into the next slide we have here of, thinking about what is some new lists that you might want to go after and find for potential prospective students, and then what are existing lists. And what we've actually found with a lot of our work with higher education universities is there are often those candidates or those leads or prospective students who haven't been reached out to in, potentially years or months. And so how can we go about, really thinking about a strategy where there's a balance of reaching out to what we call as net new prospective students and existing leads that may be in the CRM or ATS or whatever programs being used. So what we've actually listed here is a couple of different ways to think about that. We found a lot of value in, working backwards from alumni or graduates. However, we've also worked with a lot of newer programs that don't necessarily have this information. And so what we've been able to do is make some hypotheses and then use the outreach data to inform, who are these individuals that we want to be reaching out to. So what we provided here is just a list of different ways to think about building both those net new and existing lists. We also wanted to share some of the tools that we've used in the past. We've tried and tested a variety of different tools over the years. Some of the ones that are on this list we still use, some we don't. However, since every university's needs are different, we wanted to provide you all with a fuller list for you to be able to do any research you'd like to on your end. Kelly Jo, any other tools that you use that aren't listed here?
As we were, when you had asked us to do this, I was thinking like, okay, I've been both in like the software and tech world, I've been in education, and I've been in B2B, and the theme of how do we apply some of the tips and tricks from B2B to higher ed. And I go through the list of tools, and I think I hope I don't make anyone mad on this call by saying this, but it's been a lot easier in a tech startup, as you can imagine, to bring in new technology, and in higher ed, it's a lot more difficult to get the approvals for using different technology. Just because, money, you have to have an ROI on everything. And I know we'll talk about that in a little bit because it's a lot of what we've worked on with you. But, some of these lists I think are great. And if you haven't tried them, reach out to us, ask us about them. I feel like I've tried every list under the sun, from organizations that or tool, I would say, for building lists, organizations that have 3 people in them, to organizations like a Zoom Info and Hunter.io. And I think that there's a lot that you can do, again, grassroots on your own. Sales Navigator, if you haven't, LinkedIn Sales Navigator, if you haven't used it, really learn how to use it, figure out how it's really inexpensive, and use it as part of your team, or have one person that has a license that can reach out and build connections on LinkedIn. If you have a ton of contacts in your CRM that you think, or in your prospect pool that you haven't looked at in a while, look at a Zoom Info, export those, upload them, and find a way to find new information for those folks and reach out to them again. Like, people are changing, as you said, jobs all the time. There's different ways to use each of these tools. Some of them more expensive than others. And if one is too expensive, I guarantee you, again, tech background, that there's another solution out there that's less expensive.
Thank you. All right. We've also provided a couple other list building tool considerations. Kelly just touched on a couple of these, but just some like high level thoughts to be thinking about when you're approaching that list to vet, which tool might work best for your specific need. So moving on to messaging. So sales and lead generation is all about telling the right stories to the right people. And there's truly nothing different when it comes to higher education, specifically around, master's degrees and specialized non-degree programs. We've developed a couple of key guidelines that we like to follow when we think about approaching messaging. And truly at the core is this authenticity and person-to-person type of approach. Kelly Jo, what are your best practices when you're thinking about framing this type of messaging?
I'll let Joe go first because I monopolized the last question.
No, that's totally okay. I think as far as best practices go, one of the things that we found with reaching out into graduate populations in particular at North Park is the more personal that you can keep things, the more effective that outreach is going to be. Before kind of engaging with Daily Vest and kind of evaluating our marketing communications comm flows to these different populations, we saw that there was it was a lot of like big marketing, kind of not really personalized messaging, and we weren't really getting a lot of traction. However, once we kind of tweaked the language to make it much more personal, we were focusing on who the message was coming from, what those subject lines are. We made things much more personal, and then all of a sudden, our down funnel movement became much more effective. Again, we also found a lot of like blend between how much of this should be coming from an automated marketing perspective and how much of this should be coming from an actual real person. So I think that's one of the areas that I would really kind of hit home on, but the points that you have here are spot on.
Well, and you make a great point of like, what does personalized mean? I think in a lot of the work that we've done with university partners, there's a lot of, calls to action for attending a virtual information center or coming to an on-campus day, but, really thinking about what are some of that higher, like top of the funnel value props of like how this degree can make an impact and what other folks have gained from it, or even as the person reaching out, like, are they an alumni or what's their background to like have that connection point that's past just us asking for something.
Right.
I would agree with that. The last one you said, Emily, is really important because often we think, okay, I'm going into my role, I'm going to reach out on behalf of the university and make a connection. But truly the other person on the end of that email wants to make a connection with an individual, not necessarily the university at first. And people buy from or, look to other people to connect with. And so I think, you can't do everything this day and age and hit our goals manually. I understand that. But I do think that if you can find a quick, succinct way, and it can be creative, it doesn't have to always be like, here's 37 statistics of why we're the best. It could just be hey, I went through this program. You looked like you could benefit from it, or would be a great fit for this. What did you want to talk about what it looks like for me? I mean, that's a great message someone would respond to. And if they don't the first time, they might the 39th time, because we don't give up anymore. We just keep changing words.
Exactly. I also just saw a question in the Q&A here is if we'll be sharing a copy of the deck. So we will be sharing a copy of the deck along with the recording of this afterwards. So don't feel like you have to write everything down as we're going here. All right. So once we have the lists and then we have the messaging, we want to perform the actual outreach. And so, it's one thing to be able to build this ideal list of prospective students. To what we were just speaking to, it's a whole different process to build out these customized flows and to test and understand who's responding. So we can't emphasize it enough. I know we were speaking about this earlier, that, lead generation is really all about the right person with the right message and ultimately the right timing. These steps, can take a couple weeks, a couple months, a couple years. And really what we want to stress is that the key is being present and patient and ready at all times for when, a prospective student is ready and interested in your program. Joe, Kelly, how have you seen this play out in other industries you've worked in?
That's a great question. I think, look, it's, to me, everything is a process, right? And maybe that's my own anxiety of keeping a list. Everything becomes a process. But I think first you go in, you look at your system, and you say, okay, 2023, I'm starting new. Let's clean up this data. Do we have the right people? Does it have the right contacts? Is it organized the right way so I can segment it? Once you have that, do I have the right tools to reach out? Do I have the right creative messaging and the right unique value propositions and sub propositions that you need? And then from there, once you have that, it's a matter of just testing. And by testing, I don't mean A/B testing. I mean like literally sending out emails, getting responses, knowing who the audiences that you're sending to, and using different methods to reach out to folks. And keeping that organized is where hopefully the system that you're using, whatever that is, whether, whatever it is, you're able to really keep good notes, set yourself tasks and follow up. So if you are working with someone for a few years, especially in a graduate program, there could be a few years, as you mentioned earlier, like, don't forget you have those tools. And I can't express enough, like, use the tools. People will hate it. They'll hate when you ask them to use it. But if you can get your team to use those tasks, set reminders, and do that consistently, your job becomes so much easier down the road. And to me, it's all about creating a system, not just solving one problem.
Yeah, I would just to add to that, as part of our marketing communication kind of evaluation, we would evaluate things on a pretty regular basis. We would build out a comm flow for just our top funnel for about 18 months. And we would look at the different content we would evaluate what's maybe getting somebody to move to the next step. So being able to have that insight, you leveraging your systems in order to tweak things. We also were, as I mentioned earlier, very heavily involved with the undergraduate population. The undergraduate population is much more cyclical than I would say the graduate population is, because you have a starting point August 1st, and then you're going to the next August. And that's something that we would do pretty regularly. We'd evaluate a lot shorter intervals of time where we're trying to see, okay, these emails are really working well, or this type of communication is working really well, or we really need to add in a text messaging campaign at this point in time. So we were able to by monitoring the funnel movement, and that way we were kind of able to pick out different peaks and valleys and where we could potentially capitalize in the future. So that was happening kind of in the midst of the funnel, but then also when we do kind of our larger evaluation, we'd be able to implement some of those changes for the following cycles.
It's so exciting to hear you speak about that, because for us, it's like being data driven is so important, and people talk about that all of the time, but what does it actually mean, and how does it break down, based on the stage of the funnel? And it actually leads into our next slide, which is, how do you use these data analytics to get better, smarter about the outreach? And so what we do here at Daily Vest is really think about it in three main buckets. So the first being kind of that demographic data. Where did the prospective student go to undergrad? What's their current job title? When did they graduate? What are some of their interests that might lead into, LinkedIn groups or other organizations that they may be a part of? From there, when we actually start the outreach based on these lists that we build based on the demographic data, we look at the engagement data. So, how is someone interacting with your ComFlow or with your reach out on LinkedIn or the other channels that you may be using? And ultimately that plays into the pipeline data. So how are folks, where are they in terms of, have they responded? Are they opening emails, but they might not be responding yet? And how can we use that data to really inform any tweaks or changes that we need to make? Kelly, would love your thoughts on this topic. Anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think that's great. I mean, we do a lot of that in the past, and then also, at Compass. I think one of the things I would add is the team and I are always getting creative about who our hot list is of who we want to reach out to, or which prospective candidates or referrals in our case we want to reach out to. And I think there's a lot of different ways to use reports, whether it's demographic or engagement data, to you fall flat sometimes. You're like, what am I going to say this week, or what do I want to send in this messaging? What's going to help make the connection that this program is going to be really valuable for this individual? And sometimes it's just a matter of looking at your activity in your system and seeing who most recently has landed on your website, who most recently, as you know, has converted in a form, who has opened the most emails or opened your email that a number of times, who attended an event last year, or 2 events or 3 events, sort them and make those we call them hot prospects, make those your top people you're going to go after. There's a lot of creative ways to use the analytics once you've got them.
Great. No, completely agree. And this actually leads into, once you're actually using that information, how are we driving results? Mm-hmm. So when it comes to generating leads, or better yet, prospective candidates, obviously results matter. So outside of the obvious need for hitting enrollment targets and generating new applications, lead generation is all about testing, trying, changing, and winning. When you enroll a new student, it's important to look back and study, where did that student come from? And the things that we want to know is, what was going on with that prospective student when they submitted that application or submitted that inquiry? What year did they graduate from undergrad? Did they recently change jobs? Were they recently promoted? What medium did the student use to respond to our messaging? What type of message did they respond to? So a lot of different inputs. And simply put, an application win is important, but the deeper details of how that application was generated is pure gold for your university to understand how to find more lookalike potential students. Joe, how have you been able to repurpose some of these lead source learnings for your continued outreach when you were at North Park?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like two sides of the coin here. So prior to engaging with Daily Vest, we had spent a lot of time, as I'd mentioned, kind of evaluating which types of communication was really kind of causing students to engage with us throughout the funnel. And we kind of evaluated each of the stages. But then as we kind of work with Daily Vest, we were able to see, well, what's causing people at the very top of the funnel to kind of get interested? Because that was the one area of significant concern to us, which I'll get into a little bit later. But we were able to kind of see what bits and pieces of our messaging was really helping us to inform driving students down into our funnel. So I think that's one of the ways that it played out for us. And we were able to really get insight into how we might be able to tweak some of our messaging even down funnel to make that even more effective. So I think that's what I mean by two sides of the coin. So.
Yeah.
Well, I actually think that plays really well into this graphic that I know we like to look at in terms of thinking about it from a high level perspective of what does that funnel look like and how are you looking at each stage to be able to inform, where results are coming from and where you need to prioritize. So Kelly and Joe, we've heard you mention a bit about your particular needs for lead generation. Now let's get a little bit more specific. Can you each tell us about your organization and your challenges and how you went about solving them? And Kelly, we'll start with you.
Sure. So this is more about Compass Health Center, which I think having run nonprofits, there's a lot of, and Compass is not, but it's set up very similar as it's a mental health organization. And there's a lot of synergy between the way that we do things and just different words. Like we focus on revenue and growth a lot, where in my days of education, it was about admissions and the funnel and those pieces. And so, I think what's interesting is what I've learned from Compass that I wish I would have known when I worked in higher ed is the way that referrals can impact your targets. Like we always forget, like if there's one student interested in your program, and many of you may be doing this very well, it did not dawn on me back in the day, but if there's one student that's very interested in your program, they are probably telling 3 or 4 to 10 other people that they're getting their master's or that they're in this program and that they're doing it. And credit cards do a great company of getting you to refer your friends and win points, and a lot of other organizations that shall remain nameless. I think we could do a better job in higher ed of asking for referrals and finding unique programs that make it fun for people who feel good about the work that they're doing with your program to attract other people like them. And what I mean by that is truly a marketing and outreach or marketing and recruitment campaign tied toward refunnels or to referrals to fill your funnel. For me in particular, we're the state's largest partial hospitalization intensive outpatient program. We see children through adults. We work with universities every single day because of the needs that their students have, or the lack of access that they have to psychiatric services when outpatient therapy isn't enough. In particular today on all of our campuses and in our schools, people typically refer to the ER or to inpatient hospitalization. Those have low patient outcomes in many cases, and there's programs in between that are less expensive and more comprehensive. That's PHP, IOP, and it's what we do. And, for us, it's about using Daily Vest among a number of other organizations, not organizations, but programs and ways to find and problem solve referrers so that we can, most of our patients come to us through a referral source. And so we used Daily Vest to work with our clinical leadership to target the right referral partners, create messaging uniquely for those partners, and then implement an outreach function where we could build and nurture relationships with interested schools, therapists, and doctors and hospitals. And we had great results, not just to sell Daily Vest, because I know that the goal today is to educate and to look at all the different ways that we, that are out there for all of us and how we've grown in our roles as lead generators, but we would have 30 to 40 referrals a month, about 100, 150 new contacts per week. And these are very different results than I think you would see in higher ed. But Emily, you can tell me if I'm wrong. I think it's different for provider base or referral base. And then a lot of connections. And we've built our database. I think when we first started, The marketing and outreach department at Compass, we had around 6,000 connections, and we have about 60,000 targeted, what I would call engaged contacts, which is pretty incredible for us.
We make a couple great points that I want to speak to. The first being the power of referrals. We've seen that especially with these newer programs that we've been supporting where there isn't an established base, reaching out to who we think the prospective students may be, and then learning that they might not be interested, but they have a friend who is, and then getting that data point and being able to speak to what's that friend audience look like, and tracking that in the system has been big for some of the newer programs that we've been supporting. In terms of volume for numbers, I mean, instead of it being referrals, it's hand raisers and conversations. So conversations that the admissions teams are having with students who may have never heard about the university or program before. And I'd say on average, we're seeing anywhere from 20 to 40 of those conversations a month. So fairly similar, just a different ask of not necessarily a referral versus a, direct inquiry.
Got it. So it's same top of the funnel fillers.
Exactly.
Like the pre-funnel as we call it.
Perfect. Well, thank you. I'm going to hand it over to Joe to speak more to your experience at North Park.
Yeah. So for those of you who are not familiar with North Park University, it's a private Christian liberal arts university located in Chicago. It's about 2,800 undergraduate students, 2,800 students. Most of those are undergraduate. We do have 5 graduate schools and then one school of adult professional studies is what they call it, that kind of falls under the graduate enrollment area. And I know I've talked about a little bit about this already, where our challenges were. Kind of after we got to the point where we evaluated all of our different reporting, we really noticed that we had a huge sticking point at the top of our funnel. Our graduate recruiters were excellent at getting students through the funnel, but it was a very reactionary approach to recruitment. So they're getting an applicant and then they're working with that applicant and we're able to enroll those students, but we weren't getting enough volume to really we're starting to look at, can we support these programs going forward? And so that's why we decided to go out and look at different sources for lead generation, and DailyVest was ideal for us because of the ability for us to be very personalized with our communication. We were able to develop a system where we were basically taking a lot of the messaging that we were using maybe further down funnel and allowing those students to kind of experience that same type of personalized messaging. And now all of a sudden they're working with a recruiter that's kind of re-emphasizing those points at different stages in the funnel.
Joe, can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah, go ahead.
You said something that actually kind of tying it back to B2B tips for higher education. I think that's one of the most important pieces, is that in many cases you said, and this could be different for everyone, but once the applicant is there, your team did an excellent job moving the candidate through the funnel. I think that's the difference from what I saw in B2B and higher ed, is that we rarely ever paid attention. Like, we'd go to high school fairs and things like that. We'd buy the list, but we did not do a lot of that pre-funnel work. And there wasn't a lot of belief in it. It was like, once they fill out the application, we'll go ahead and meet with them. Or once they fill out an inquiry form, we'll meet with them. Very rarely did we focus on going out and finding those the right fit for us. And I think that is a huge piece of what that, in my experience, could have done better in higher education.
Yeah, and that was one thing that we experienced as well. We did a lot of like the traditional like lead generation. So we're buying these lists from who knows where.
Right.
They were kind of modeled off of proximity to our institution, possible interest in a specific area. And then we would just blast with marketing communication to see what we could generate. But there wasn't a lot of like individualized outreach to these folks. Even when we shifted our messaging to be more personalized, it was still kind of a challenge because we really didn't have the insight into who we were talking to.
Right.
It was just kind of a guess. Whereas the undergraduate population, you could probably still get away with a list purchase because I'm purchasing a list from ACT or College Board or wherever. These are students that that they're in high school. They're all kind of at a similar stage. They're looking to go to college.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas people who might be looking for a master's degree. It's a much broader range as to who may or may not be interested. And I think by leveraging something like LinkedIn, it's an excellent opportunity for you to kind of have the insight. Oh, we know where they went to. We know that they have their degree. We know what their job title is. We know where they may be in their career. They might be interested in exploring this. And we were able to get really kind of fine tuned with our messaging as a result, which consequently led in the first 6 months of using Daily Vest, we were able to generate over 120 new leads and 13 newly enrolled students. And to give everybody some context, that's talking about 75 total students for, let's say, I believe it was for our spring semester. Of those 75 students that enrolled, 13 of those students came as a direct result of Daily Vest in a matter of like 6 months versus going through the traditional like 18-month time frame. So we were able to capitalize on this pretty quickly. And consequently, it's kind of led to kind of a more steady flow for us to generate new applicants.
But even so, like the key there is that the 13 of those came from you proactively looking at the top of the funnel. And then, you know, Emily, you've given a ton of, and we've worked together on a number of projects before, but you've given a good list of, there's many ways to do that, to focus on your top of the funnel, no matter what your, you know, your strategy is and the programs you're using.
Well, and back to that kind of like, you know, buy a list and like spray and pray. What we're able to do instead is say, hey, we want to test like folks that just graduated, folks that are 5 years out of graduation, and folks that are 10 years out of graduation in this like geography with, you know, X, Y, Z other variables, and then reach out to those 3 groups and see which ones are most responsive based on that data, then double down on like where we think or where we're seeing more success, which then leads to better results in a shorter period of time. Still not like tomorrow, but you know, it's over that 6-month period versus an 8 period.
The other thing I noticed like over the last, I'd say 3 or 4 years is the when the subject line has a statistic in it, like we help, you know, 30 increase this by 30%, or you know, help increase your salary by 30% by looking at a master's or whatever it is. And then the rest of the subject is literally like the rest of the email is 2 lines. It has such a higher success rate. It's like the statistic is like, okay, that's about me. How can I improve myself? How can I reach my goals, financial, educational, whatever they are? And then in there, it's just these 2 personalized sentences, you know, from whomever is sending the message. I just think that's just a down and dirty trick that people forget. It's that simple, and it works.
Completely. Well, and it's the difference of like North Park, the university, the brand reaching out to a prospective student, and Joe Miller reaching out to a prospective student.
Right.
That human to human interaction.
I wouldn't open either. I know him as well also, so I can say that. Thank you.
Anything else, Joe, you want to add before? We've got a bunch of questions here, so I'm thinking.
No, we can go to questions. I'm sure other things will come up.
So one question about this was it the 13 enrolled for one graduate program or across the 5 schools?
It was across the 5 schools, and that was for 75 across the 5 schools. That's correct. I need to make a correction. That's probably 3 of the graduate schools, because I believe only 3 of the 5 had start terms in the spring.
And I also think we only ran it on 3. Yeah. So
yeah.
Perfect. All right. Let's dig into some of these other ones here. So this one's for you, Joe. What internal changes best supported your top of the funnel lead generation efforts?
I think first and foremost is just having a plan for the campaign. We really, in order for us to be effective, we knew that we had to have kind of a dedicated staff member who's going to kind of be managing, actively managing, engaging with those prospects as the handoff was being made from Daily Vest. It wasn't something that our recruiters were necessarily doing actively, because we did so much of the automated marketing kind of at the very top of the funnel. So we needed to kind of reprioritize, like, these are people who are already, these are like warm leads. So we kind of had to break out who maybe like a colder inquiry was versus somebody who is like a warmer inquiry at that stage. So that was one of the biggest changes that we had to make, kind of planning for this type of lead generation. if that makes sense. I don't know if I answered that correctly or
I
not.
think so. If whoever submitted that has a follow-up, please feel free to drop it here in the Q&A. Here's one. What are some of the things that you wish you had known before starting the Daily Vest program?
I think one of the biggest things that I wish I would have known is just kind of the level of involvement from, in our specific case, was from information technology. There is some work that has to be done. And if your institution prioritizes, let's say, like digital security, it's good to have those folks there at the onset. So, and I think if you're coming from the admissions perspective, it's also making sure that you have your marketing folks involved, your processing folks involved, anybody who's managing your CRM or your SIS, whatever tools you're using, making sure that those people are involved from the onset, because it'll make the process much smoother. You'll be able to kind of hit the ground running versus having to kind of learn through trial and error.
And this one kind of follows out. So was North Park making LinkedIn connections directly through the direct messages on LinkedIn? If so, were the messages coming from a recruiter's personal account or a North Park University grad school account?
So
That's a great question.
Yeah, it is. So we did have our director of graduate admissions. We were using her personal account, but the messaging was sent out through Daily Vest. And Emily, you'll have to correct me if I'm.
Yeah, no, I can.
You might be speak to the technicality part of it, but we were
Yeah.
using our graduate director's account.
Yes. And we've actually found a ton of success in that because, again, like I mentioned, like it's not the brand reaching out super generic. It's this individual human that we're able to tie kind of like their background and their personality to the outreach. What we do with Daily Vest is we use LinkedIn and email. And so we use that director of graduate studies LinkedIn account and then created a secondary email address for the actual outreach. Now, all of the messaging was approved by the team prior to any reach out being done. And that's kind of the beauty of, the partnerships that we've been able to have with different universities is that we're really generating basically like inquiries or hand raisers of folks who want to learn more about the specific programs. But once they raise their hand, that's where the recruiters or the other folks on the admissions team are able to take those conversations and work them, given that, you all know the best ways and information to share with these prospective students. Really, our job is just to generate them.
I would add to that too, because a lot of folks out here probably are looking just for the tips and tricks on how to do this their own. They're not necessarily looking at Daily Vest, which is not, again, like that's great if you are, and if you're not, we get it because everyone's at different stages in the organization. I do think that that's one thing different in higher ed than business. Also, as a sales executive, I often would use my LinkedIn account tied to me to build those relationships. And in higher ed, there always seemed to be like a stigma attached with using your own LinkedIn account. In certain cases or in certain groups that I worked with, of using your name tied to your LinkedIn account to do outreach because the university didn't want us to in many cases. But I think that's I think that there's if you can be on the innovative side and understand it again, that people buy from and trust people, not necessarily the organization or the brand. It's a mistake almost not to be able to use your own LinkedIn, which is really used for business, to generate those key relationships and bring them back to the university in support of your goals and the work that you're doing.
Yeah. And one thing that from our perspective, by leveraging our graduate admissions director account, she was also a faculty member who had connections with students. So going kind of connecting the loop here, a lot of those were coming from referrals. So she would connect with somebody who was maybe an alum that she had taught with, and now all of a sudden there's a conversation started, and now she gets a referral of another student potentially. There's also leveraging. She had a lot of connections with different nonprofit groups. We have a master's in nonprofit management at North Park, and we were able to kind of connect through that route as well. So I think leveraging the personal account really helped to drive movement for us.
Again, it's trust, right? And yeah.
And the one thing I'd recommend is if you are looking to, really develop your own internal lead generation service or lead generation efforts for the top of the funnel is get sales or LinkedIn Recruiter Lite. I think it's like $159 a month. But that's where you're able to really dig into, some of those parameters that aren't necessarily available with Sales Navigator. So you're able to look at years of graduation, undergraduate degree. There's a lot of like power in that tool to be able to do some of that on your own.
Do you work for LinkedIn, Emily, or receive any commissions from them?
I don't, but like you said, the purpose of this isn't necessarily just daily best, but to like empower folks to be able to do this work and find the right students. But there's a reason we use a suite of tools. LinkedIn is really great for certain elements. And then there's other ways from like email enrichment and other tools that we use.
Recruiter Lite is a good one. Like going the full boat recruiter, which I'm sure many organizations have from their HR departments, is a very expensive tool.
Well, that's why Recruiter Lite is like the sweet spot for depending on your budget. Another question, have you done any portfolio marketing, clustering different related programs together? So I love this question because we're actually doing that right now with one of our universities in the Northeast. They have a variety of master's degrees in like environmental studies, but there's like 5 different concentrations. So what we're working together on is there's kind of like a higher level degree that starts the conversation, but then once someone's having a conversation, it kind of partitions into the degree of emphasis depending on what that student's interested in. So we are actually actively doing that right now, and I've seen some good success. I hope that answers the question. If not, please feel free to drop a follow-up.
For sure.
Let's see. Outside of your admissions team, are there any other teams that need to be involved in when you're looking at the Daily Best process?
I would say, anytime you bring in a new technology or a new service, I think you will all agree with me, people get a little nervous. They're thinking, am I not doing my job well enough? Is marketing will say, are we not bringing in the leads? Like, why do we need this? IT will say, this is a security issue. Leadership will say, why are we spending the money? Like, there's just so many hoops to jump through. And so I think really understanding it's a simple program. And I think understanding your asks up front and inviting each of those people to the table at the beginning of the conversation is really worthwhile, because it slows down the process. At least it did for us. Like we were ready to go, and we had a couple of weeks. And Joe, I think you had said you had a couple of months because of having to have IT involved, and had you have brought them to the table sooner, it would have been a lot. Everyone just needs to feel like an owner of this program or of any program, and so really understand the entire program before you launch, like with anything, and make sure you have the buy-in from the get-go, so no one feels not like they're not included or that you are trying to replace their work.
No, I think that's a really good point. And I was in a unique position because I oversaw the CRM activity, but then also marketing activity. So my position kind of fell in really nicely when working with Daily Best, because I work with our graduate director. Like I said, having IT, which kind of oversaw our student information system, not necessarily our CRM, but they kind of oversaw university security, and just like we should have had them in the conversation at the onset. But definitely making sure that you have anybody who's responsible for marketing or messaging communications. Every institution set up a little bit differently. Information technology is really important as well. And then obviously anybody who's involved with like like I mentioned, CRM processing as well. Because there may be things like something as simple as we need to add a new source code for Daily Best, or we need to add in a certain specific report for these types of students versus other types of inquiries. So
the other, sorry, go ahead.
I recommend. Sorry.
The other thing is I was really hesitant to involve some of our clinicians who don't necessarily speak or market to the general public that sometimes we're reaching out to. But what I found was with the Daily Best messaging, having them review it, even if it was painful for us at times, like in the marketing and outreach roles, because it did slow things down a bit. And there's a lot of debate over every particular word that we would put in that paragraph. It actually became really fruitful, one, because the messaging was better. 2, it resonated with the audience, and then 3, they felt a part of the process. And so when it came time to show the return on value of what we were doing with DailyVest or with any project that we're working on, having them involved at the get-go in their program areas, and this definitely translates to higher ed, was extremely helpful, and everyone got excited about the success and then the investment in bringing in, new referrer sources, or in your case, it would be new students. And I think there's a lot of magic in that.
Agreed. There was a follow-up from the portfolio marketing question. So the original question was, have you done any portfolio marketing, clustering different related programs together? And what are the challenges was the follow-up. So I love this question because we're all about getting as specific as possible. So like there is like an argument to be made for when there's multiple programs, how can you call out kind of the different areas of emphasis that are different, and that you do run the risk of, if you're being a little bit more generic, having folks say no or not pay attention because the specifics don't speak to them. Now, I would say that there's a couple different ways to combat that. One is using multiple channels. So what we found is with the LinkedIn outreach, typically reaching out 2 or 3 times, you're either going to have someone respond or not respond, and continuing to reach out after that doesn't necessarily make sense. But when it comes to email, we found there's much more of an appetite for receiving the different drip emails or receiving the different sequences, where you're able to get into some more of the specifics of the different programs. So I think it's just understanding like what's the strategy, what are the different value props, and how can we kind of mix and match depending on which channels you're using.
I think messaging helps a lot there as well, because if you're going to cluster some of that together, I think you can come up with a pretty crafty tagline that speaks to everyone, or a subject line, and then you can show your unique value prop as an organization or a university, but also the sub value propositions for each of those programs. If you're looking, if you've thought about this, you should look at this program, or here's the 5 new programs we offer, and a tailored guide. Call us to figure out which one fits right for you, or putting together a blog post or an article that you can send out through a DailyVest or through a mass marketing approach to those groups that lets them read through an overview of each of the programs, or ties back to your website so you can see the engagement. You can do a lot of putting things together as long as you make the focus of that email content the recipient. Like, make it about them, for them, let them select what works for them, and guide them through that, very succinctly, and it works well.
I'd also add to that, I've seen a lot of success in some of our university partners doing like 20-minute webinars or 30-minute webinars about the programs of emphasis, and not just like sitting there and talking at the potential students. It's like bringing in a current student and interviewing them, and like positioning it that way of like, come chat with, a current student in the program who has XYZ background. Really at the end of the day, this is all like, how can we make this more personal, more storytelling? And that's what's going to have the biggest impact.
Yeah. I think we get so hung up on the process of these things, and sometimes they're really simple. You could ask like a pretty well-known faculty member to sit in as the moderator, provide the questions. You could have marketing send out an email to a handful of 100 selected people that have really had high engagement rates with you. And then you could have a very simple webinar dialogue. You don't need slides, but it's just an informational session, and it goes over really well. It doesn't have to be, an overwhelming project.
Agreed. Well, thank you both so much for this conversation. Unfortunately, we're at the end of our time today, and we can't answer any more questions. I know there are a couple more that will follow up via email. We so appreciate you all joining us today. We'll send out an email later this week that includes the link to the recording. Thank you again, and we hope to see you at the next webinar.
Great. Thanks for having us. Bye, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.